That's an inspiration. That's as close as we're gonna get to me drawing.
I started with a tutu and I cut an elastic band about the size of my waist. Then I cut out a bunch of strips of tulle that were about double the length I wanted my tutu to be. And don't worry, it doesn't have to be exact. I slowed this down so you can see that I'm looping the tulle around the waistband in this way, and then you basically loop it through itself and pull it tight. Then you repeat that step until you think you're going to go insane. But in all seriousness, I had 3 different types of tulle. I had this pink sparkly stuff, and then I have glow-in-the-dark tulle. It just looks like sparkles, and then this green tulle, and I evenly spaced them around the waistband. Also, I don't have a dress form, so I just put it around this thing of patterns to make sure it was kind of taut the way it would look on my waist. And I tried it on a few times too. I tried to make this underskirt thing, but it ended up being useless because it's see-through, so. Here I'm doing the bodice, and I used this pattern, but I think any corset pattern would do as long as it's something you're comfortable wearing with nothing over it, because there's nothing going over it. And I actually altered the pattern quite a bit, so it doesn't have to be exact. And here I'm cutting out interfacing, and you can see my really cute kitty sewing with me. This pattern had the interfacing pieces be a little different than the bodice pieces, but you can make them the same. And then once you're done cutting them all out, you should iron them onto their respective bodice pieces. Once I'd ironed on the interfacing, I sewed all of the adjacent bodice pieces together, right sides together of course. Make sure to leave 5/8 of an inch or more for the seam allowance. Once you finish that, iron down the seam allowances because you're going to use those as boning channels. Then you sew the lining in the same manner that you sewed the actual bodice, but don't put the interfacing on. Then I get a little mad at the sewing machine.
This is not working.
Sew the seam allowances down to make channels so you can slide in your boning. The curved parts of the bodice can be a little tricky, so some trial and error will be involved. I use zip ties as boning 100% because of Makara Tours, and it's a lot cheaper, so it's really nice. Slide the boning into the boning channels, and I had to fix a bunch of my mistakes that I had made, so I'm doing that too. Here I'm cutting off the top of the boning to make it the right size so I can sew the boning channels closed. And then I sliced open my finger and it hurts so bad, and I'm so bad with blood, so I ran to get my mom. And then I promptly continued on my harrowing journey to create a fairy costume. Sew the bodice and the bodice lining right sides together along the sides, leaving the top and the bottom open with raw sides together, and then sew another channel on the back on each side.
Damn you!
At this point, I completely ditched the pattern and just made up how I wanted the overlay to look. I used the same tool, the green tool that I used on the tutu, and just laid it flat and pinned it across the bodice. Then I sewed the overlay to the bodice all around the edges. I don't know what happened to the footage, but I did put grommets on the back. Make sure not to sew outside of the grommets. Leave them free of the overlay. Cut all the overlay that's hanging over the edges off, and it doesn't matter if it's super neat, it's kind of an organic costume, so that's okay. I wanted to put some kind of flowers on it, but I decided to only put it around the top edge. I thought it looked a lot simpler and nicer that way, and I just hot glued them to the top. I covered the grommets with green thread because I was a little worried that the fabric would fray. That took a really long time. I found some green ribbon and then I laced it up. You might want to take a minute to ask yourself why, even though you slept 15 hours, you're still tired. On the fabric, I drew with chalk kind of a leaf shape, and then I cut it out and sewed 2 pieces right side together, leaving the top open so I could turn it to the outside. I also cut out smaller green leaves that were slightly different shape just to, I don't know, give it some depth and variety. Then I had a brief breakdown wondering why at 20 I'm making a fairy costume. To make them look a little more like leaves, I drew vein patterns and then I went over it with dark thread on the light leaves to give it more texture. For the waistband, I cut out fabric that's slightly bigger than my waist so it can overlap in the back. I played around with how the leaves were spread out a lot until I liked how they laid on the tutu. Once I was happy with that, I sewed the waistband to the leaves with the waistband facing down. I folded the waistband up, then so it encased the top of the leaves, I folded it back down on the other side. On the outside, along the fold, I sewed until it caught the inside where I folded over the waistband. But alas, what is a fairy costume without wings? I had no idea what I was doing, but I looked up some pictures for inspiration. I used old wire hangers and bent them into the pointy top wings and then the little loop bottom wings. And then I sort of just jammed all the wire pieces together, folding them a bunch, and I put a piece of fabric around it really tight and wrapped it, and then poured hot glue on it basically to make it stable. I took some glow-in-the-dark tulle and then making sure it was taut, I hot glued it to the wire. Honestly, I would recommend putting the tulle on before you've wrapped it all together because that would avoid some of the difficulties I ran into. Then cut any tulle that's hanging over the edge of the wire off, and you're not going to get that close, but it's okay because you're going to cover it in glitter. I used a lot of glitter glue. I covered every edge of the wire on the front, the back, and the sides, and then I made swirly patterns on the wings. A lot of it seeped through the tulle, so if you want to avoid it getting on your floor, don't do it on your floor.
You got to take your boots off, Ruby.
The fairies wear boots.
All right, you ready? Just start.
If I was Tinkerbell and I went to the winter woods, then I would need boots.
No, she would never have boots on.
Yes, she would, because warm fairies can't go in the winter woods.
You could sew some fairy boots.
I know, I should have thought that through, but I didn't.
All right, commence prancing.